Well, welcome everyone to our webinar series. Happy Monday. I'm Allison Kelly Hedgepath, joined by Dara Lee Lewis. It's nice to see everybody today. And we are so thrilled to welcome back Erin Murray. Many of you might remember Erin as she gave our webinar last February, which seems a world away now, but Erin is a registered dietitian who has her master's in nutritional science and juggles a busy private practice with also being involved with active research. So Erin, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. So good to be back. Awesome. So I can go right ahead and start sharing.
Perfect.
Would that be? Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Sounds good.
I'll go right in. Hello. And we've got lots to talk about again. So I will hop right to it. I know our time together is precious. So I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. It's a great Monday for nutrition. It's never a bad time for nutrition, right? So for those curious, as Dr. Kelly Hedgepath said, my name is Erin Murray. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been working with clients for a very, very long time. I've been coaching people for over 10 years now. Can't believe it, but it's true. And I love working with people, and I absolutely love nutrition science. And what we started with on our first call together, we did a workshop called Reframing Nutrition. It was really part one. So today we're jumping right into essentially where we left off. So what I want to do first is make sure I recap properly for us. So where we left off with Reframing Nutrition part one is we really took the time to sort through some ideas that helped us understand that nutrition is often actually a very misunderstood science. And there might be some ways that we could use it a little differently that would deeply alter our relationship with our food and our health. So we really looked through how nutrition grew into a science and how it kind of grew in the wrong way in our culture in some ways. It kind of can get misunderstood, misreported, and we live in what we call a food culture that poses a few challenges to us. So that term food culture, we certainly added to our lexicon in our last workshop together, and we're going to use it a lot today. And so I offered to everyone in Reframing Nutrition Part 1 that nutrition is not just a biochemical science, it is a biopsychosocial science. So I find in my practice and with the hundreds and hundreds of people I've worked with over the years, it is profound to shift into this mindset that nutrition actually is going to be related to our behavior, and it's going to be related to who we're around, and it's going to be related to the way we relate to our bodies or how we learned about food. And that is going to deeply alter our food relationship and therefore our nutritional intake. So I was just talking about this with someone this morning. I often really like to think about this, and I hope this kind of encapsulates what I'm getting at. When we go to change our nutrition, we absolutely have the nutrition goal that we can set of, say, I want to eat more vegetables. But what I really need to make happen is I need to get a brain to decide to eat more vegetables and put more vegetables into the body. So the brain and our behavior, therefore, is just as important as the food goal itself, because we know for a fact that we can set goals like, I'm going to follow Weight Watchers, or I'm going to eat more vegetables, or I'm going to go start exercising more. And we kind of notoriously all understand that those goals don't always come to fruition. You know, we have that big boom during New Year's revolution or New Year's resolution, goal setting. And everyone kind of jokes that by the end of January, the goal has fizzled or we didn't reach it. And there's actually reasons for that. Interestingly, it's not just a discipline issue. There's a lot of neuroscience and neurobiology that we now understand that drives nutritional intake and behavior and things like stress and emotional eating and using food as a reward, for example. And that is starting to get more understood. Thank goodness. We have lovely research really booming in that field. And that's why you'll often hear me refer to things like food behavior. And we also talked about in Reframing Nutrition Part 1 that our food culture has a very challenging tug of war going on at all times, which is that we have a lot of foods in our society that we call hard to regulate, which I explained in our last session, which is these are foods that are so pleasurable or hedonic that they overpower all of our mechanisms to regulate the food. So for example, if I'm eating very sweet or fatty foods with not a lot of fiber and protein, I can't really get full because my nutrition isn't talking to my hormones in a certain way that helps me feel fullness and stop eating the meal once I'm full. So there's foods that kind of can make us overeat. There's foods that have some properties to them where we're triggered to eat more and crave more, like certain types of sugar intake, for example. And I call those hard to regulate foods. They're foods that don't speak to our systems all that well. Whereas there are foods that are easy to regulate foods, like whole food proteins and like seafood or vegetables and healthy fats like almonds or avocado. Those are easy to regulate foods because they're not processed. They're whole food sources that our bodies actually do a pretty darn good job of understanding and kind of handling. So I like to think of those hard to regulate foods versus those easy to regulate foods. And we had talked about that quite a bit. The other component of our food culture that's quite challenging to navigate, though, is that we have many, many diet prescriptions that we tell people to adhere to handle this food problem. So there's kind of food everywhere in a sense. And then there's all these diets that are supposed to tell us or help us not eat the food that we're surrounded by. And, with 4th of July fresh on our minds, a lot of my clients were talking with me in the week leading up to 4th of July. How do I want to handle this weekend? How do I want to handle these barbecues and these parties that I'm going to? And how do I know what to eat when everything is chips or hot dogs or cake or ice cream? All of these foods that might be hard to regulate. And so we're kind of surrounded by them. And then the traditional dieting strategy is to give people meal plans or points or calories and say, just don't eat the chips, just follow this meal plan, or just don't eat the ice cream, just follow this meal plan. But then what if we show up to a party and we're really hungry and we're really stressed and we're sick of dieting and we think to ourselves, oh, forget it, I'm so sick of dealing with this. I'll get back on the wagon on Monday. And then we just do that for months, years, whole lifetimes. And so in that sense, our food culture is quite hard to navigate because all the food that we're surrounded by often isn't nourishing. It's very challenging for our body and brain to handle. And then there's all these diets that also don't really work because it's still very hard for our brain to handle, and we just can't seem to hang on to them. So then in that case, the question, of course, is, well, what do I do? And the answer is that's why we have to reframe nutrition and understand it's a biopsychosocial science where our behavior matters very much. The types of foods matter very much so that our system can learn to regulate itself. Our food culture matters. Our relationship to food matters. How we handle stress, even, for example, matters. How much we move matters. And so we have to start thinking about nutrition in some new ways, as opposed to being on the wagon and off the wagon. And we have to understand the way environment can drive food intake. So a lot there. And that's why this has been 2 parts. There's really a lot here. So that's why in Reframing Nutrition Part 1, we tackled a lot of that. And today we're going to shift into picking up right where we left off, which is that we need to have a different framework of nutrition where we focus on what I like to think of as learning how to eat, not how to diet, but I need to learn how to eat. I need to develop something much more nourishing and manageable and sustainable and joyful and peaceful so that I can live in health for a long time. And that's certainly my goal with all my clients. And we have so much wonderful research now that is helping us understand how to create habits and how to rewire old behaviors and how to have a new relationship with food where we can sustain it. So we left off right here. Let's learn how to eat and get off this wagon in a sense. So how can we start understanding where we need to begin? I love to think about our food background because where we come from affects our food perception very, very much. So if I grew up in a home, for example, many of my clients have shared that they grew up in a home where a parent or both parents were dieting a lot. So their food background had a lot of beliefs about fat and carbohydrates or meal plans or frozen meals or snacks and how to do all these different things with nutrition. And none of them really ever worked. And often my clients will share how stressful that was. So then they may have even been sneaking unhealthy foods or bad foods or off-limit foods. And they might have even been little and been doing this. And so then they might have grown into an adult that hides foods a little bit or stress eats and doesn't want anybody to know, or always thinks they're being bad because they're eating fat or carbohydrates or whatever it might be. So because of that, we need to examine our behaviors and beliefs and work through some of these self-limiting beliefs that might be sabotaging a little bit, sabotaging that ability to build a new relationship with food and really approach it in a new way. And to that end, I like to think about building a new food story. We start having a new relationship with food when we approach it in a new way and in a fresh way and in a lower stress setting. And we start building new habits and attitudes and practices so that our day looks different and our food relationship looks different. Often this requires releasing some of these concepts that we call diet culture, which is not healthy eating, but a diet obsession. And we're starting to understand a lot now that dieting and chronic dieting really takes a toll on appetite regulation and stress and reward. And it actually can even be a predictor of weight gain. So a lot of people start trying to go on a new diet over and over again. And every time they reinitiate a new diet, they might lose a few pounds temporarily and gain more and then some back, or the new diet altogether might make them simply gain weight and they never even lose weight. And these new habits and a new way to use food is just never being reached. So we have to release some of those kind of diet mindset things that we learned so much growing up in the country that we live in. And really other countries are starting to have it now too. But when we are raised with our perception about food to be diet-based, we never actually find peace with food and nourishment and learning how to have a healthy relationship with it. So we can shift out of diet culture and shift into nourishment and focusing on lifestyle nutrition and lifestyle medicine and finding ways to really thrive with this whole new perception and framework of food. So that would be step one, which we were talking more so about at our last session, and I just recapped for us. And let's go right into then, what would step two be? So I start reframing nutrition. I want to build this new nutrition relationship. I want to shift habits. I want to change my food story. I don't just want to live on and off the wagon anymore. Where can I start with that? And I want to take time today to look at food itself in some more ways that we can use it specifically. And one thing that we talked about at our last session is that we have these hedonic foods that are hard to regulate. So these are pleasureful foods that take over pleasure-based pathways in our brain, and they're hard to regulate in our GI tract. So our body has a hard time knowing how much we've eaten and if we're full or not, and if that was the right amount, or if we should just keep eating, or if we should stop eating. Those are questions that actually our body can answer, but only if we are consuming foods that our bodies kind of know what to do with them. So I think of foods that are hedonic, but then those foods that we're good at regulating, I call those homeostatic foods, because homeostatic regulation was a term that we had talked about at our last session. And I think a lot about those. I like to focus on those because those are huge groups of food. So lots of different families of nutrients that our body is really good at kind of talking to, in a sense, or communicating with. And then that helps our body regulate its food intake and its appetite and its body weight. And we can see from cultures around the globe that cultures that do that really well tend to be very, very healthy. And we're going to talk about these details today. So if we think of homeostatic foods, all these wonderful whole foods that we are good at managing without dieting, we're just good at managing them naturally. That includes things like adequate protein in our diet and using whole food carbohydrates like sweet potatoes instead of white sugar. And then optimizing our fat intake with healthy fats like olive oil, which we're going to talk about. And then reducing harder to regulate foods like processed and refined foods. So enriching our diet with homeostatic foods would be part 2 of learning how to eat, because this is going to give us the advantage of helping our body do what it knows how to do. Nutrition that works is going to be that nutrition that is easy to manage and we don't have to constantly be thinking about it. And so if we start thinking about, well, okay, in our culture, it is hard to manage it. So does that mean that this is kind of the way it has to be? And I find it so interesting to look around the globe and look at beautiful research that we have that shows us that there are food lifestyles around the world that are rich in foods that are easy to regulate. And the people in these regions tend to live a very long time, and they have lower incidences of disease than the ones that we have here in the West and in the US. And we have something to learn from these cultures. So let's just kind of shift into examining some ways that this food can show up. One of my favorite kind of regions to focus on as an example of this is the Mediterranean regions. And the Mediterranean diet has become a famous diet around the world because they continually have the lowest incidences of all the diseases that plague other parts of the globe. So they have lower incidences of metabolic diseases or heart-related diseases or type 2 diabetes and things of that nature. And the fascinating thing is they're kind of doing the things that we're trying to talk about today. They don't subscribe to diets. They have a food culture. So there's really something to be learned even in their food behavior. And I think if we look at how they're doing it and what they're eating, there's so many wonderful things that we can glean. And for that reason, I really like to work with my clients on how to build them, the individual, their own food culture. And that's an idea that I really want to share with you today, because instead of thinking about how can I just give you a diet, I like to think about how can I build you with you your perfect food culture. So I don't need to give you the Erin meal plan. I want to give you the you food culture that even though we just, despite living in a food culture that's very hard to navigate, there's no reason why we couldn't have a wonderful food culture of our own. So let's look at a little bit about what this could entail and what these foods look like. So in doing this, I want to first explain what these list of nutrients on my screen are, because I often talk about these things and then realize that if we haven't ever been explained what these are, it doesn't make any sense. So I want to make sure I explain my terms, because this is some food science. So you may have heard of the term macronutrients. So we hear a lot about carbohydrates, fat, and protein. But what those are macronutrients, which means they are nutrients that contain calories. So carbohydrates are a family of nutrients that contains 4 calories per gram. And those are all of our vegetables and fruits and starches, which we're going to talk about shortly. Fats are a family of macronutrients, and so is protein. And when we put all those together in our daily intake, we can see that they all equal our total daily calories. So macronutrients transfer energy into our body, and we measure energy in terms of calories. Just like we can measure an inch with a measuring stick or a measuring tape, we can measure calories, and that's how we're measuring energy. So we have those, and those are a key component of our diet, our total energy intake. But then inside of our macronutrients, we have micronutrients, which are our vitamins and our minerals, and also wonderful things like phytonutrients and functional foods. So vitamins and minerals don't contain calories, but they're wonderful little chemicals that are necessary for life. So all of our essential vitamins and minerals are necessary for human life. We need them, like beautiful vitamin C and all of the B vitamins and vitamin D and A and E and K. These are vitamins that are essential to life. And then we also have minerals like copper, iron, calcium, chloride, and these are all essential to life. You don't need to know them all separately per se, because you're not getting an exam or a quiz on this. But those are, I wanted to explain, those don't contain calories, but we need them. So what we want is a diet that has the right macronutrients for us. And we want our macronutrients to be rich in vitamins and minerals. So we want nutrient dense macronutrients, because I could give you a bowl of potato chips and you would have a kind of refined and fried carbohydrate where it would be very, very high carb, very low fiber, very low protein, very high fat. It would be hard to regulate, and it would be low in vitamins and minerals. Or I could give you baked sweet potatoes that were roasted with some olive oil, and it would be really, really high in vitamins and minerals and fiber, and it would be lower glycemic index for your blood sugar, and your food package would be so rich in so much wonderful nutrition that's so wonderful for your body. So we want to have nutrient-rich macronutrients. And also, I just want to mention, because they're so cool and it's worth knowing, other parts of nutrition that we're looking at now are phytonutrients and functional foods. And these are not your essential vitamins and minerals. There's something else. So phytonutrients at this time are a group of compounds that seem to have health promoting benefits, that have anti-cancer properties, anti-inflammatory properties, longevity properties, and these have different names. So they're not vitamins and minerals. They have names like anthocyanins and zeaxanthin, and they're really a mouthful, but these are nutrients that are in the plant foods that we eat that seem to have wonderful benefits to our body. Even though they're not essential for life, they enhance life. So anthocyanins, for example, are a phytonutrient in blueberries, and they give blueberry that beautiful blue color. They're also in beets and strawberries, a little bit in grapes, blackberries, and raspberries. They give those foods that beautiful color. And the compound that creates that color also seems to have some very potent anti-inflammatory effects when in the human body. So phytonutrients is a big area of research now that are very, very cool, and more to come on those. But I just wanted to share that, because then you know that all your beautiful nutrition actually is offering you so much more than just some calories. And then we also have things like functional foods, which are foods that offer additional health benefits like fiber. And fiber does things like bind cholesterol in the GI tract. It can help lower cholesterol. It can help improve digestion. It can help improve our gut health. And so it's not essential to life in that regard, but it actually is optimizing human life. So those last two bullet points are just to let you know that there's actually some additional wonderful components to your nutrition that you can take advantage of too. So then to dive into our macronutrients, because people are always saying, well, what should I eat? I want to learn how to eat. I want to eat more easy to regulate foods, homeostatic foods that my body knows what to do with. So what are those? Well, when we look at carbohydrates, those are going to be our vegetables, our fruits, and our starches. And this is what is so rich in the Mediterranean diet. They're eating vegetables and fruits at every meal, and they're including whole food starches like potatoes, rice, beans, and legumes. And of course, here we go with all the kind of crossover. All of those foods are so wonderfully rich in phytonutrients, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So that food package that we see in the Mediterranean diet for our carbohydrates offers so much valuable nutrition to us. And our body is really good at regulating the intake of these types of carbs. That's why no one has ever overdone it, so to speak, on a bowl of broccoli, but we absolutely all have been there, done that with a bowl of ice cream, for example. That's what I'm talking about when I say easy to regulate versus hard to regulate. Ice cream can, in a sense, for lack of a better word, trick my system a little bit. I don't know how much I've eaten. I don't know that I'm full. Broccoli is easy to regulate because my system can feel the nutrition, the fullness, the nutrient thresholds. So if we look at these successful diets from around the world where they have healthy body weights and long lifespans, they're using carbohydrates like these. And this is a really valuable thing that we can learn from them about how could I improve and optimize my carbohydrate intake? I can begin with something like adding more vegetables in, adding more fruits in. And when I go to consume starches, for example, why don't I look at things like squashes and sweet potatoes and legumes instead of things like white sugar? And then, of course, these come in food packages that are so wonderful with rich in phytonutrients. Even in this photo, you actually can see phytonutrients like anthocyanins in the eggplant and lycopene in the tomatoes. These are the phytonutrients that I'm referring to, and they're rich in fiber and all the life-sustaining vitamins and minerals. So these help lower cholesterol. We see that in the Mediterranean diet trend, absolutely. They help balance blood sugar, which can reduce cravings and help manage appetite. And when we have a high fiber meal, we have reduced appetite and increased satiety at the end of the meal. So we really want to understand the way that these are used in the Mediterranean diet so that we can use them for ourselves here at home. And the Mediterranean diet is also using proteins in a certain fashion. They are very forward in their seafood and their eggs, and then lean cuts of poultry and lots of ample low-fat dairy around the Mediterranean region, like low-fat Greek yogurt and wonderful items like that, low-fat cheese. Tofu is also another great example. And then lean cuts of wild game, beef or pork intermittently. And protein is really interesting because protein has this a little bit of a different effect on us. So carbohydrates, we break those down and they enter the bloodstream as glucose, which is blood sugar, and we use that for fuel. Protein has this other relationship in a sense where we really need to hit certain thresholds of protein intake to feel full in our stomach. So while we're eating, many things are going on in our GI tract with our hormones and with even our stretch receptors, which our brain is monitoring how stretched is our stomach as we're eating. And protein helps initiate satiation, which means my body is starting to say, I've gotten what I've needed from this meal. I have the nutrition that I need. I am ready to stop eating so the meal can come to a close. Protein contains nutrients, they're called amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein that our body looks for to perform that process. So when we look around the globe and we see these super healthy diets like the Mediterranean diet, we see that wonderful complete proteins like seafood, eggs, poultry, and dairy are available at meal times to, again, promote a meal that's easy to regulate. My body knows how to talk to that food. Interestingly, too, there's lots of wonderful research on this that continues to grow, but we're seeing a trend where higher protein diets are associated with decreased waist circumference, which is a measure of risk for metabolic diseases, and also lower blood sugar, and really importantly, more lean body mass. And when I say that, I'm referring to muscle. We love muscle. Muscle is a very wonderful organ system that we now are understanding increases lifespan, increases resiliency, increases immunity even, and it helps us also burn more calories, really. So when we have more muscle, we have more lean mass on our body, and that overall increases our basal metabolic rate. So that's what we call your BMR. And the higher your BMR is, the more calories you burn per minute. And the interesting thing about muscle is it's really expensive energetically. So muscle requires a lot of calories and nutrition to maintain it. So we don't hold on to muscle that we don't need. Our body is so smart. It is going to get rid of tissue that it doesn't need. It's never going to hold on to something that's really expensive and it's not even using it. That would be a waste. So our bodies will get rid of muscle that we're not using. And when we do that, we have lower and lower metabolic rates. So people who have more muscle can eat more food and stay weight stable, for example. But we also know people with more lean muscle, they're burning more calories, they're more metabolically flexible, so they can eat more and move more and burn more, and they're just working at what we call a high energy flux state. And the benefit to that is twofold. On the one hand, it's very beneficial because we know it's wonderful for us. It's wonderful physically. It's wonderful for our biology. It helps us live a long and resilient life. So more lean mass is associated with longevity and also resiliency. But also, not for nothing, as someone who works with people every hour of every day, when people can eat a little bit more and their diet can be a little more flexible, they're pretty happy, emotionally and psychologically happy. So when people have more muscle, I love that they get more metabolic flexibility, because that way they don't have to eat this super low calorie diet. And if they ever go over it, they gain a pound. People are really happy when they're on a wider road, so to speak, with their diet. And muscle offers that as well, which I really like. And there's many other biochemical benefits that I won't get into today. But lastly, the other thing I will mention is muscle has anti-aging components, and we're starting to understand more than ever that we really want people engaging in resistance exercise and weight training as a means for longevity, because as we age, we're losing muscle. And that's one of the reasons why the metabolism is declining. So we can attenuate that by lifting weights, and then we can burn more calories and, in a sense, participate in some anti-aging activity, actually. But that also really helps promote dense bones. So we know that resistance training also promotes bone mineralization, which is a very effective way to help reduce risk for osteopenia and osteoporosis, and reverse osteopenia, actually. So we really like to get people moving in that regard. And when we do that, we need more protein. And it's so interesting. We're talking about how to kind of stop dieting and live a nourishing lifestyle. And in the Mediterranean trend, they are eating a lot of protein, and they're also moving a lot. So when we look at these regions, they also are, as we say, interacting with gravity, because they are doing farm work, they are boating, they are lifting things, they are walking everywhere, they're biking, they're very active. If any of you have been to Greece or Italy, you know many of the areas throughout those countries, there's stairs everywhere and a lot of inclines. So people are really moving a lot. Lifting heavy things, even simple things like if you are out in a vineyard or in a field or even in your own garden, and you are holding a big basket and picking tomatoes and filling the basket with tomatoes and then walking them up into the house, you are lifting added weight and you are taking more steps. So you're interacting with gravity further. So all these it's so interesting. They all work together. They work very symbiotically, and all the protein in the diet, therefore, also can help you build that muscle and protect that muscle so that you don't lose it. So we really want to make sure that our diets are adequate in protein. And as I said, again, it also balances blood sugar, promotes lean mass, and helps us have that healthy waist circumference, which is another risk factor. And also it's a major appetite regulator. So protein is very filling, and it helps us feel fullness at the end of a meal. And this list here is a list of proteins that we see a lot in the Mediterranean diet, and we know that we can use those at each meal also. So then our last macronutrient is fats. And fats are sometimes get a little misunderstood because, all of these macronutrients can, because these are huge families of food. So in every family of each macronutrient, there's less nutritious versions and there's more nutritious versions. So Similar to protein and carbohydrates with fat, there's going to be some fats that are not super nutritious. They're less nutritious. And then there's going to be fats that are very nutritious. Fat also, though, sometimes gets misunderstood because a lot of fatty foods sometimes get misunderstood as a protein. So for example, one of the things that is very common is I might have a client or an athlete in, and they'll say something like, oh, I thought I had protein at that meal. I had peanut butter. But if you look at a nutrition label, what I'd love to have you do, you can do this when you're in your kitchen later, just look at the nutrition label on your jar of peanut butter and look at total calories, and it's usually about 180 or 190, and then look at total fat, and then look at total protein. The total protein is going to be usually 5 grams or less for the serving, and the total fat is going to be 18 grams or more usually. So that is a fat. That has a little bit of protein in it, but that is definitely a fat. And fat is higher in calories than protein and carbohydrates, but it's also so healthy, and it's been misunderstood at times. So we just want to use it for what it is and enjoy it for what it is. And really healthy fats that we see in the Mediterranean diet are going to be wonderful foods like olives and olive oil, nuts like these beautiful pine nuts on this screen, but also things like walnuts and pecans, and seeds like pumpkin seeds and chia seeds, fatty seafood. So wild fatty seafood or sustainably farmed fatty seafood has a really nice fatty acid profile in it. It tends to be very rich in the anti-inflammatory fat known as omega-3. So fatty wild seafood is actually a great place to get healthy fats because it's in that package with the protein. And also avocados and avocado oil is this beautiful and very delicious, nutritious fat. And avocado oil is actually, fun fact, very good for cooking at a slightly higher heat. Olive oil has a lower smoke point than avocado oil. So if you are going to saute or bake something at a higher heat, you might enjoy avocado oil. And it has a very, very similar nutrition profile to olive oil, which is that it is rich in omega-9. These are monounsaturated fats that are known to be very, very wonderful for heart health and can help reduce risk for a lot of the heart health concerns that we have here in this country because it is not saturated and it has some anti-inflammatory effects as well. So we really love, as they're rich in the Mediterranean diet, these wonderful omega-3 fats and omega-9 fats. So those are really wonderful and delicious and healthy fat to take advantage of. And we want to make sure we're getting a serving of those in our day. And so how does fat function then? Fat is a very, very good nutrient for satiety. So on the protein slide, I mentioned that protein helps satiation. Satiation is me feeling full right now in the moment at my meal. So that's I'm full now. Satiety is different. Satiety is I ate a few hours ago and I'm still full and satisfied. I feel balanced. I don't have cravings. I'm not hungry. So satiety is the continuation of satisfaction and fullness. And we actually want a lot of that because we don't want to eat a meal and we're hungry an hour later. We really want to have satiety between meals so that we're balanced and well nourished and we're not snacking and we're not craving anything. The other thing that fat does that's wonderful is it slows digestion. And when digestion is slower, we get a slower trickle into the bloodstream of glucose. So we get very balanced blood sugar after a meal when we eat complex carbohydrates with these wonderful healthy fats. It helps slow digestion and that nutrition trickles into the bloodstream slowly. That helps us have more energy, feel balanced, stay satisfied, and we have more meal satisfaction. And then we have less cravings and less snacking when our blood sugar is really balanced. So remember, in this kind of big umbrella that we're talking today, I am thinking about how can I create a healthy, nutrient-dense lifestyle for someone and help them stop dieting and suffering on and off the wagon. One of the first things I would want to do is help balance out their physiology. So you can see why fibrous carbohydrates, adequate protein, and these wonderful healthy fats help our bodies so much. Because if I'm dealing with breaking some habits that are not healthy for me, it really helps me to at least take the edge off my biology. Because if I'm trying to break a habit for example, sugar or sweets, and I'm getting really, really bad cravings, that's going to make my habit change harder. So I really like to think about how can I help my biochemistry help me change my habits? And then how can I also then work with my brain and help me change my habits? So that's why we're coming at this from both ends. So we want to understand how those things can work so symbiotically together. And using healthy fats here is a nice way to help our body along throughout the day at each meal with that support. And I just want to highlight a few nutrients of interest that are so highly available in a beautiful nutrition culture like the Mediterranean. These get asked a lot about in regard to heart health too. So I thought it would be fun to chat about these. But with calcium, we want about 1,200 milligrams per day for women and 1,000 milligrams per day for men. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, where can I get that from? And if you really want to dive deep into this, I recommend tracking your nutrition in an application like Chronometer or something similar. If you really want to look at your vitamins and minerals, that's a nice, easy way. It takes a little bit of work because you have to measure your food just for a few days if you just want to get a snapshot. Sometimes with clients, I do that if it's needed. But you can see that there's actually a lot of different ways to get this into the day, but there's some foods that are particularly rich in calcium. So low-fat cottage cheese and dairy and low-fat yogurt and low-fat milk are all going to be rich in calcium. And canned salmon with the bones in the can are going to be higher in calcium. So fish bones are really, really rich in calcium. So when the salmon gets canned with it, we get more calcium in the salmon. So you can do canned salmon and just pull the protein out. And also leafy greens like spinach and kale have calcium in them. So if we look at how this could look throughout the day, we need about 3 servings of those foods. And what I like to think of with my clients, if they're not tracking numerically, one way to think of this is we need a fist of those fruits and vegetables that are rich in calcium or these other nutrients, which we're going to talk about in a sec. So I think of a fist of color. So I could have a fist of spinach sauteed into my egg whites at breakfast, and I could have a fist or 2 of kale at lunch. And then I could have a serving, so about a half to 1 cup of cottage cheese as a snack mid-afternoon. And I just hit 3, that's actually 4 because I had 2 fists of kale at lunch. That would be 3 to 4 servings of a calcium-rich food right there. So we would have our full needs mostly met with even a gentle strategy like that. And similar with magnesium, we've seen recent evidence that intakes a little bit around 320 or more milligrams per day led to a reduced risk of cardiac events, actually. So we know that we want really rich diets with magnesium and potassium in them. So where can we get magnesium though? Dark leafy vegetables, low-fat yogurt, and seeds and nuts are really, really rich in magnesium. So I like to think about, again, with the vegetables, 1 fist. So I could have a few fists of vegetables throughout the day of things like kale and collard greens and arugula and spinach and wonderful greens like that. And then I could have a half cup or a cup of low-fat yogurt with lunch or as my snack. And then I could have a few tablespoons of nuts and seeds throughout the day, sprinkled onto my salads or sprinkled onto my yogurt. And if I have 3 servings total, I would get really close to that great magnesium goal. Magnesium is also relatively easy to supplement. It can be helpful in the GI tract too for digestion. It also has some utility as being helpful for rest. So it's very easy to have a little magnesium powder before bedtime from a reputable brand. I definitely have some clients who, if they exercise a lot or they're having trouble sleeping, or actually if they're constipated, magnesium is very helpful for that. So a little supplementation too is very easy as well. But we absolutely can hit some nice high magnesium intakes by adding in all these wonderful foods, these magnesium rich foods throughout the day. And then similar with potassium, we're seeing that these super potassium rich diets have some really wonderful cardiac benefits. And we're seeing that 3,000 milligrams per day or more was associated with a reduced risk of cardiac events. So we know that we want a diet very rich in potassium. So what can we do for that? We need things like lentils, bananas, citrus fruits like oranges, cantaloupe, and honeydew are actually really, really high in potassium. So if you enjoy those, definitely dive in. Apricots, grapefruit, lima beans, these are all very, very rich in potassium. And similarly, with all these foods, I would measure these in fists. So if I have lentils at dinner, I would want a fist, so about a cup or so. I could have one whole banana as a snack. I could have one whole orange, so one whole fist size with breakfast. And I've had 3 really potassium forward foods throughout the day when I've done that. So you really, if you want specificity, you would have to track these numerically, which I do recommend if you want to dive in and see how that looks in your diet. But you also can track these pretty flexibly. But notice something here. If we look at this day and adding in these fists of these vegetables at every meal, these nourishing proteins like the Greek yogurt, a cup of Greek yogurt, a cup of cottage cheese, sprinkled in with these healthy nuts and seeds, and then we add in fruits as side dish or as carbohydrate with the meal, that's a filling day, isn't it? And that's the interesting thing about beautiful diets like the Mediterranean diet. There's not really room for anything not nutritious. The plate, in a sense, is pretty crowded out. The real estate is taken up with all these super healthy foods, which I really love to think about nutrition in that way. And I often call that nutrition of addition. And that is lifestyle nutrition, where we're adding so much in, and it's not about subtraction. It's not about sticking to the points or sticking to just resisting, my sugar addiction. And when we think in that way with a lot of those diet tones, it can stress us out and make us think more about the foods we're trying not to eat. And I love the way the Mediterranean diet shows us lifestyle nutrition, which is this complex topic that we're talking about at our last session. And again, today, this lifestyle, this Mediterranean lifestyle promotes nutrition of addition. It promotes movement. It also promotes community with their sharing meals. And we touched on that in our last session too, that sharing meals and community is a huge component of nutritional intake. Deeply nourishing foods, balanced meals, and all these behaviors culminate in habits. And if you are from the Mediterranean or have any loved ones from the Mediterranean or any friends, I certainly do. The funny thing about it is their food is a lifestyle. So if I were to tell one of my dear friends from Italy, here's what you need to start eating, and I gave her a meal plan, she would say to herself, or she'd say to me, she'd be honest, she'd say, what the heck is this? I'm not changing my nutrition. I would never follow this. I know how to eat, because her beautiful food lifestyle has insulated her from the need for a diet. And that is something that I like to work on with my clients, so that they're not trapped dieting their whole lives, but they have lifestyle nutrition that serves their body with all these beautiful nutrients. So then also in learning how to eat, part 3, so part 1, rewriting our food story and examining our food relationship. Part 2, I need to enrich my diet with easy to regulate food so that my body is balanced and it's helping me feel my body and feel my fullness. So step 3 is amplifying that, which is emotional versus physical hunger. This is a tough one. I'm not going to lie. This one can take clients, in my experience, some time to work through this. But this is where we learn how to tell the difference between being physically hungry and being emotionally hungry. So when I'm looking at my food and approaching my food, I need to be able to tell, am I feeling physical hunger and I'm ready to receive some nutrition? Or am I craving something and I'm not physically hungry at all, but I'm really stressed out, I'm anxious, I'm distracted, or a very common one, I can't wind down, so I just kind of need to eat something. I call that emotional versus physical hunger. One way that I love to start bringing gentle awareness to that is to use things like a hunger and fullness scale. So number 10 on the hunger and fullness scale is I'm painfully full. I am in pain. I have eaten so much. 9 is I'm uncomfortably full. 8 is I'm a little bit too full. 7 is I'm comfortably satisfied, very physically comfortable. 6 is slightly full. 5 is neutral. So I'm not hungry or full at all. I'm neither. 4 is I'm starting to notice some hunger. I'm slightly empty stomach. 3 is I'm hungry. I could eat, but I'm not starving. 2 is I'm very hungry. It's time to eat. 3 is I am ravenous. This is where we're hangry. This is where we're not in a good mood. I need nutrition. I can't even work anymore. I'm so hungry. Number 0 is I'm so painfully hungry. This is a problem. I have low blood sugar. I might not even be able to drive. And I love to have my clients start tuning into this so they can start discovering where are they on this scale before and after meals. And it's not unusual for a client to say, I'm not eating till I'm a 1. And then when I eat, I'm a 9 or a 10. And it's interesting to me because that's always a clue that someone isn't feeling their body all that much. If they're not noticing how hungry they're getting and then eating way past fullness. And often too, this gets mistrained when we have diets that are telling us to eat at certain times and we're not actually noticing the body. So tuning into the physical body is a nice way to start learning, when am I physically hungry? And then if we're approaching food or we're going into the kitchen or we realize we're snacking on something and we say, actually, I'm a 5, I'm not hungry, then we know we can start exploring, well, what is making me want to eat right now? And that helps us learn where we are using food for more than its nutritional value. And I always joke because I love food. I love food so much, but food can only do so much for us, right? And using food to solve an emotional problem that it cannot solve is a misuse of food. And that's a lot like trying to cut a tree down with a hammer. It's just not going to work. And that's why so many people feel trapped in a lot of their food behavior habits, because they keep going to it because it kind of feels good or it feels comforting or the habit feels strong, but we don't feel like it's ultimately serving us. And even though I love food so very, very much, there's really only so much that it can do. And we can achieve a new kind of deeper level of health when we actually give ourselves the grace and the space and the opportunity to work through the places where we're using food for emotional reasons. And that helps us have a much more peaceful relationship with food when we use food for what it can do, and we no longer use food for what it can't really do for us. And learning how to eat, part 4, is we want to cultivate what I call self-regulation. This is a very complex topic. This could be its own workshop, so I won't make us dive deep in, but self-regulation is the psychological and biochemical ability for your body to regulate itself. And we have really interesting research on the way things can dysregulate us or help us regulate. For example, movement, we know that certain amounts of movement help all of our hormones function properly. So there was a very neat study, actually, this number is pretty specific, that found that less than 7,100 steps per day made it difficult for our brain to know how much to eat. And 7,100 steps per day isn't 10,000, but it's also not nothing. It's very easy to not get 7,100 steps per day. And if we think about, man, I'm eating a lot, or I feel like I'm eating really mindlessly, or I feel like I just can't lose weight and I don't know why, a lot of that kind of gray area is lost in these places where our system is not able to self-regulate adequately. So I love studies that help us understand how to help the system regulate. So I always tell my clients and people, at least get 7,000 steps per day or more. That could be like bare minimum. And we know that helps our brain regulate our appetite and our food intake. We also know that sleep is so important for self-regulation. When we are not sleeping adequately, we are easily dysregulated. We are extra emotive. We have trouble processing emotions. We digest and process food differently when we're underslept. So we know that we consistently need a good 7 to 8 or even 9 quality hours of sleep. And things that help this and help regulate our sleep cycles are things like getting natural sunlight exposure upon rising in the morning and blocking screen and artificial light after 10 p.m. or before or within 1 to 2 hours before bed. That helps our sleep cycle and the hormones related to it and the clocks related to it regulate themselves. Then also things that can dysregulate us are things like stress, and if our food at home is a stressful environment. So walking and community and meditation and journaling practices and little things like kitchen cleanouts or having someone at home cook with you or work on nutrition of addition with you are all things that can achieve a lot to help our system self-regulate, which just helps us really kind of enjoy the day with a lot more ease. And this is a big topic, so I'll stop there. But just to touch on this is an important part of learning how to eat, because otherwise we're fighting with ourselves all day. If I have cravings and I can't feel my fullness and I'm really stressed out and work is crazy and I'm not exercising at all and I'm barely sleeping, can I give you kind of really nice, exciting nutrition goals and have you just meet them? Or is every goal we set going to be hard and harder and harder? It's going to be harder. So we really want to help our body self-regulate so we make our life easier. And then lastly, learning how to eat part 5, I'll touch on is proper goal setting. And this is something that I'd like to take deep dives on with people because it makes so much sense. And when we crack this code, we really can change our health. And honestly, we can change our whole life because we have a better sense of how to create change. But every habit has a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. So anytime we want to change something, we have to figure out, could I get rid of the cue? Could I intercept the craving? Or could I shift the response? And then therefore I break the reward and I slowly over time rewire the habit. I'll give you an example. If every day Erin walks to work, she walks by this donut shop, and one morning she walks by and she says, wow, that smells very, very good. So my smell is cueing me to maybe visit this donut shop. And then I go in and I think, okay, I'll just get a coffee. And then I'm smelling everything, I'm seeing everything. And I think, ooh, I'm just going to get a donut. I'm just going to get one. Then I have this delicious donut. And then the next day I'm walking to work again and I smell the donut shop. And I try to resist, but I do the same thing. And then the next day I do something similar and I keep doing it. Not before long, that cue of the donut shop will immediately trigger a craving for the donut. And I will want the donut, which is the response. And the donut is very delicious and pleasurable, which is my reward. And not before long, when I'm even just leaving the house and I haven't even smelled the donut, my walk to work is cueing me to crave a donut. That's a little bit of a dramatic example in some senses, but in other senses not, because it's not unusual for me to have clients or family or friends talk about morning rituals or walking by Starbucks and grabbing a bagel or a croissant or doing something at lunch or ice cream. You know, in the summers, how many of us want ice cream every night and we all want to go to the ice cream shop and walk to the ice cream shop. And these things happen quite easily. And that doesn't mean something's wrong with us. And it doesn't mean we don't have discipline. But what we have done is build a habit in our mind that has a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. So I like to shift habits by dealing with the architecture of habits so that we can kind of outsmart some of our behaviors in a sense. And there's a lot of really interesting research on habit. And a very large study just came out this past winter that found they were trying to help people create a habit of going on an after dinner walk. And for some people, the after dinner walk became a habit within about 18 days, I think it was. And for other people, the after dinner walk did not become a habit until 208 days later. I say that because we always hear it takes 30 days to build a habit. And I always am meeting people who are upset that after 30 days, they didn't build a habit. And we now have research that's showing us, well, we don't really build habits in 30 days because everyone's habits are going to be unique to them. So for some people, something new is going to be easy and maybe it'll be 18 days. And for other people, that habit shift, they might have a really strong cue or a really strong craving for it. It's going to be 200 days before the habit is shifted. So habit science is a really nice area of research where we're learning a lot more nuance about the way our brain and our behavior will do things. And because of that, I always tell people step 5 of really learning how to eat and creating a nutrition lifestyle that takes good care of you. Step 5 is start smaller than you think. One habit at a time. If there's anything you take away from today, please let it be that. One habit at a time. Our brains do not do radically new things beginning on Monday, especially multiple radically new things beginning on Monday. Our brains are deeply wired to automate behaviors and enact out old rituals and habits. That's why I even care about how my clients learned about food growing up, because some of those habits could go back 20 years. And I need to know that when we go to shift that habit. So one habit at a time, start smaller than you think. And start with something small. I kind of think of them as habit seeds that then you can build on and amplify them. So start small and water that seed. And keep in mind that you could change the cue. For example, I'm going to walk a new way to work so I don't even smell the donut shop anymore. That could help get rid of the cue entirely. This is why kitchen cleanouts can be really helpful. We're just taking away the cue entirely. Or I could say, okay, I can't change my walk to work. I'm still going to get the cue, but I'm going to rewire my craving because I'm going to pack breakfast and I'm going to bring it from home. So I have to walk by this donut shop, but I'm changing my craving by giving myself a different response. I'm not going to buy the donut. I brought breakfast from home. So I'm kind of intercepting this habit wherever I could. So approach your habits from that kind of engineering standpoint and start really small and just do one at a time. And a very famous saying is, you will not rise to the level of your motivation because motivation fails. Motivation is fleeting, but you will fall to the level of your systems. So if I can create new automated behaviors, new habits, this healthy food culture at home, I'm going to build it one step at a time. Our brain likes that. That is a way to communicate that our brain can do. We can really do that when we do it smart. So instead of thinking that you're a failure or you just don't have enough discipline or you don't know why you can't stick to things, I promise you brain and behavior makes so much sense. And there's a lot of ways to work with these things now that's really exciting and hopeful, and really dramatic change can be achieved with this reframe of nutrition into creating nutrition lifestyles with smart habit change and nourishing food. So I will stop there and I will leave you with this idea. Are you ready to participate in the process of building yourself a new nutrition lifestyle instead of putting yourself on a new strict diet that feels like your brain just can't hang on to that? I really like helping people shift out of that. And I love when I see my clients really thrive once they make that shift. So I urge you to consider that side of nutrition. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Well, that was wonderful, Erin. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all those stages. And there's so many questions at every stage that we could just dive into. So here we are at 3:32. So I think this means we're going to have you back for part 3, because clearly there is so much to talk about here. But I really love kind of your bird's eye view, right? That you really want to get to the why. And I think that's really what we should all be thinking about as we're trying to construct our best life, right? And what we can do with each of these pieces, right? So if we're doing something that we really want to change, right? Really get down into the nitty gritty and figure out why we're doing it, and think about what's optimal. So I love that approach. I think because of the time, we can probably try to save this chat and maybe answer some of these questions. I know Dr. Lee Lewis has been very quick with the keyboard, so it's responded to many, and we can maybe follow up with some of the answers when we send out our post-webinar survey, which of course will have Erin's contact information. And Erin is accepting new clients. I have really enjoyed sharing a number of patients with her over the last year, and I can say that she's really excellent with her approach. So Erin, thank you so much for this today. This is really a treat.
Thank you all so much for having me. And I see there's really wonderful questions in the chat. So I'd be happy to even write responses and get those all to you ASAP. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot here, so thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope everybody enjoys the rest of summer. And we're taking a hiatus for August, but we hope to see everybody back in September. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.